I'd admit that this is one of the ones I've been most looking forward to over the course of the weekend, because I just think the two speakers are exceptional. The name of the talk is Change and Hope, which is almost a bit abstract. Like, well, what's that talk about? I hope it'll reveal itself by the end why it's called Change and Hope. I'd like to introduce Barry O'Donoghue and Tim O'Donoghue. They're father and sons from the Stax Mountains. And they've a really interesting story. They've a really interesting interest, generally in nature, but primarily in some of Ireland's most endangered species. And really both of them, as you'll hear, have dedicated a lot of their lives to it. So I don't want to say too much about you lads. I'd love you to introduce yourselves. So Barry, maybe start like who you are and what's your day job, where you're from, and we might get the same from Tim afterwards.
Yeah, hi everybody, great to be here. Like you said on the bio to this event, I'm Tim O'Donoghue's son. So, what was that? I'll always be my father's son in a way. I work in nature conservation. I grew up with nature conservation and a mix of farming, I suppose, and nature conservation. And I work with the National Parks and Wildlife Service as what's called a Grade 1 in the Scientific Advice and Research Directorate. So working with a lot of my good colleagues there, fighting the good fight for nature.
Your job in conservation specifically relates to work with farmers, is that correct?
Yeah, partly. Yeah, one of the roles that I have is agriculture, the small matter of agriculture and the environment in Ireland. So everything terrestrial and aquatic terrestrial in Ireland comes back to agriculture, really. So yeah.
Tim, maybe the same yourself. I believe you have the acclaim of being at least one of Ireland's first ever wildlife rangers. Is that true?
That's correct. Anyway, the roads has changed, because Barry used to be my son one time, but now I'm his father. It has changed over the thing, but over time. I again grew up in the Stax Mountains, and I did farming in the Stax Mountain, and after a period of time, then this 1979 Ranger Court came up, and I joined that, and we started off at a very, very early age. We didn't even have a pair of binoculars. We were there because the European people, Europe wanted us there, and we had to be there because they enforce European law, which we didn't still have. And I remember buying a pair of binoculars that time. Things were tight that time, as money wasn't as plentiful as it is now. And I remember after the side of the road buying a pair of binoculars to watch out to see birds. Then bird identification, there wasn't even a book there at that stage. You didn't even, that people would say to you, oh well, he's all right, he's for the birds. So. But things changed a lot then after that, and we're working away. So since then, I spent 33 years as a conservation ranger, retired 10 years ago. So it is about 10 or 12 years ago since I gave the last talk. So I wasn't dreading this until now. But anyway, it was grand. But it was at all that most of the talks today. And when I look at the people and the young people that are so interested, so good, it gave me great hope. I was just saying to Barry, I was down in Moore Park last week, and there was a complete change, anyway, I can tell you that much, from here to there. And, anyway, I can say what I like here, anyway, because there's no one to contradict me, only Connor. He's the only one that's all there. So anyway, it was great to be here, and thanks, Ray, for inviting us.
So I definitely think we'll double back around to your career as a ranger, because it spanned a couple of decades, and I'd say, you had different adventures along the way. But tell us a bit about your grew up farming in the Stax Mountains. Where exactly are the Stax Mountains, and tell us maybe about growing up farming there?
I believe the Stax Mountains in Lyreacrompane, because that's where we were bred, born and reared. And when I look back, how lucky I was to be reared there, to have worked there, to have reared my family there, to have met my wife there. I met my wife just 2 miles away. There was scarcity petrol at the time. But anyway, it all, and I'm going to be buried in Lyreacrompane. So the whole thing has happened. How lucky can you be, to have all that around, and to love that area, and to be in harmony with that area. Even when Barry was a small child and we had 5 children, and we'd be moving cattle, and we used to move them along by the road sometimes, and they'd be all excited learning about meadow sweet and plant life and everything like that, and they'd come to with about maybe 10 different versions. Oh, that's this and that's that. You know, the amount of stuff, the array of plant life was along. We have, I think you were on it, right, yourself. We've an oak woodland ourselves when we're going back to the old oak woodlands, and we were blessed to be raised in the Stacks Mountain. Stacks Mountain was a lot of uplands, rugged ground, rugged pasture, and then you had the peatlands, of course, and Neil was talking about peatlands before this, about the cutting of the peatlands. And that was what actually happened there. You know, it was the first time that we ever had a wage in Lyreacrompane that peatlands were taken over to the Germans that had actually put over Bornemona. The Germans brought the machinery and things like that. And it was the first time that everybody, you know, had a wage. Every man, woman, and child worked in the bog. You got paid for what you worked, for what work you done. You didn't get paid to turn up, and it was grand because it moved the poverty from the area at the time. But looking back at it, we didn't know what damage we were doing. There was a lot of carbon disappeared anyway, without a doubt. But we had very little at the time. But you know, the environment was also rich at the time because it wasn't damaged. And the more we got, the more we wanted, and the more we still want, and that's how the environment is.
What kind of farming system did you? There's one of the interesting things about the stacks is that there's no sheep on them, is there? No. Why is that? And what farming did you grow up doing, or do you still do? Tim gave me a 95% commitment that he'd come. He said the only thing that would stop him is if he didn't have a silage in. So
you see, the thing about that, we're all corralled into a system, and we're talking to Conor over today. We're all come into this system where we all have invested without knowing it, and we have invested into the system. Now a lot of us can't get out of it. No, you know, I'm grand because the thing about it is, which has been passed on to the next generation, and they have, you know, what's invested with slotted units and this and that. You can't get out of it all of a sudden like that. But there's when we started off with that place where you were on, there was only 3 cows and a pony actually. Now there's hundreds of acres, and there's no spud sat, you know, like the man said. But anyway, that we be farming mostly, and we don't the big thing, we don't have too much cattle on the land anyway, you know, and we don't overgraze it. But you know, that's
very good. Did you grow up in the stacks as well?
Yeah. That's right, yeah.
Do you chat about your upbringings? Was it a totally different place, or you'd probably grow up in the early 80s, Barry, did you?
Yeah, that's right.
Was it totally different to when Tim grew up, or?
It would have been, yeah, but it's changed even more since, I suppose. This was just to describe the Stacks Mountains for people geographically. They're in North Kerry, kind of east of Tralee, south of Listowel, and north of Castle Island. And I suppose one way of describing the landscape is through the beautiful place names. So we could start at the west, I suppose. You Knockan and bring it through to Knockaridera and Drogheda Moor and Drogheda Beg, Glowantani, Alkeen, Lyreacrompane, Broadra, Lashnanoon, Corrig Cannon. So really lovely, beautiful, unique place names that describe the place, and they're kind of undulating uplands. All of the imagery and video here is actually from the Stacks Mountains, and I suppose there's bog, like Tim was saying, and wet grasslands, fields full of flowers and colour, and lots of streams, lots of rivers, wet, soft landscape, and I suppose landscapes, as you've been talking through there, like they're about people as much as physical. They're cultural, landscapes are cultural as well, and you know what, I suppose a particular type of farming has evolved there that has evolved over generations. I guess it's evolved to suit the land and the landscape, like with neighbours helping one another out, and farming know-how handed down from mother and father to sons and daughters. And I suppose it's hard work as well. Yeah, it's the land is in great land. It's not very productive from an agricultural point of view. The rain is never far away. It's boggy, wet, rushy land for the most part. I suppose just in terms of the cultural side as well, like, there's field names that the people who walk those fields today, they might not know where those field names even originated. They can only guess. They go back generations, and even entire parts of the mountains that would be known by family names, even the Stacks Mountains themselves, I guess.
Where is that name from?
The Stacks, there would be a family, yeah.
Did I say that to you on the phone? Andreas the Stack. People here go to Andreas this morning. Yeah, Andreas is from North. He said the Stacks are from North Kerry.
That's right, yeah.
And they have a famously kind of, Andreas is dark skin, jet black hair, very similar to yourself. So there must be something in it.
And I suppose, look, you can see it there maybe in that video, like, the light, the mood, the spirit. There's kind of an intangible spirit to the landscape that, I don't know, it's home for us. Like, it's where we feel anchored. It's what we are. Like Tim in particular, like, is of the ground, like from the ground, spent all his life on the ground, and shows what a good event this is if you actually got Tim, let alone get him out of Kerry, but to get him out of Lyreacrompane on a Saturday is a big thing. So yeah, you'd be like, one of my favourite places to sit is up in Clough up in the mountain, and you're looking back west over the mountains. There's a lovely series of hills, and you can watch the rain come in and rainbows, and it's a really inspirational type of landscape when you get to know it. And I suppose just on that, like, like John B. Keane, I suppose he derived a lot of his inspiration from the landscape in the Stacks Mountains. He would have got his inspiration from the characters that played out their lives on the Stacks, and I suppose the field perhaps is his best known play and film. That the field is actually just out of shot there, but it's an actual real field, and so I suppose that's the people from there are hardworking, resilient type of people you'd need to be to survive on that land. And I suppose, like the field as well, like, kind of a sense of hard work and fair play. It's kind of rooted in the people there, and like you say, suckler farming is the main entity, cattle are the main entity there. I suppose calves born in the springtime and brought into the mart in the autumn down to Castleisland or to Clay or into Listowel. So yeah, that's kind of the Stacks Mountains, alright, yeah.
Tim, do you think has the community changed? Is it similar to when you were young? What differences would you say in terms of the?
Well, everything has really changed, because I'm talking about back 70 years, and everything has really changed there since. There's a community spirit at the time that was there, was second to none. That you were talking about open moorlands of ground, which is completely different now. There was open moorlands and big areas, and people from all different angles had cattle on that moorland, and there wasn't any stock-proof fencing at that stage. And the way they controlled the cattle was, you'd be at the west side, and if the cattle were coming down too far, you went out to their dog and drum up over the top, and they stayed there for a few days, and they came down to the east side, and the other fellow did the same. And and then when the time came, they were walked to marts 10 and 15 and 20 miles, and sometimes had to be brought home again because they weren't sold. The landscape has certainly changed so much. Creelty came in for the Stoutdown, and Creelty that time it was the forest service that came in that time, and they planted, and everybody thought it was a great idea, and there was employment that time for about 30 or 40 people. Today, the place is over 60% planted, and there isn't employment for nobody there. There's amazing now, like there isn't a factory, there's nothing. Everybody thought that this was progress at the time, and it wound up when they finished that, people just dropped off, and there was nobody in. Now they come in with big machines, they clear the forestry, and they leave it looking like I don't know what. When everybody has seen the clear fell, then that's a week and a fortnight's work. Then they come back in, and something I can't understand. They leave it settled for a year, and then you have the bank folds and and our pygmy shrews and everything coming back in again, starting up a home, and then they come in after a year again and tear it up again, and then it grows up then again. There's another fortnight or 3 weeks work on that, and it stores for 25, 30 years again. There is land up there that was planted 40 years ago. There was borden and raised bogs planted in parts of it, and there's planted with 40 years, and I think the smaller they get. I know one bog actually that's planted, and to the side in complete fin, and the trees are getting, the trees are growing and getting wider. Down they're going. because the bog is so weak. And it has changed. The whole system has changed. At that time, there was houses all around the area, and to just like this house here we were talking about where they go, there was great friendship, great crack there, dancing and singing, and there were thatched houses, and that you'd see in the morning when you come out, you'd see miles away in front of you, and you'd see all the houses with the smoke going out of them, and thatched houses and all that. But now you can't see. There's areas now that can't see the end of that field because they're inside in forestry with 8-bit midges. So
I know that there's a place, there's an old house in Lyreacrompane in the Sax Mountains, and it's called the Lighthouse.
oh yeah,
And you're nowhere near any coast, but it's the Lighthouse, and that would have been, I suppose, a prominent location overlooking Lyreacrompane up on the hill that everybody would have known when they'd be returning home from the rambling houses or whatever. And
yeah.
I can only imagine what it was like back then. Right?
Yeah, the lighthouse, and that was now if you went to the lighthouse, you wouldn't see across the road in front of it. Forestry have changed the whole system up there and completely, and it was over 60% planted now, so like that's a huge area. Well, because I remember long before I were 79, long before that, I'd say I was maybe 20 or 19 or 20. I saw this bird. Now, you couldn't ask anybody what was it. Nobody knew, and nobody said, what in the name of heavens was wrong with him? But I watched this bird anyway, and I eventually found out, I tracked it down to be in harrier. And it was on a certain post continuously, so they were obviously nesting there. So I met the great Frank King. I don't know if anyone ever heard of him. Frank King spent years with me as well, and all I ever learned was from Frank. Frank was a gentleman. He died a couple of years ago. He was 93, but he was well renowned anyway, Frank. But I met Frank after, and I said, as young fella, I said, I was watching there. He says, it wasn't a harrier, he said. It was a Montague's harrier. And they bred it there, he said, and it was the first and only pair that ever bred in Ireland, he says. So, I was so intrigued at that. But in harrier then, who couldn't be attracted to in harrier to see the call, the display, the food drop, the whole that, you just couldn't explain it. That's one of the memories before spent the last hour of our life. That's the memory that come into your head. That'll be the nice memory.
One of my first memories ever as a child was actually out watching for hen harriers. I probably wasn't watching for them at all because you were out watching for them, all right. It was probably, I'd say, 3 years old. It's one of my first memories ever in life, and so it was down by where the cordal pair are there, where Heather was came from, and I was just sliding down this grassy bank behind you, out in the moorland, and using that as a slide. Thought it was great fun, and but you were waiting for the male to come in and pass the food to the female aerially with that somersault, and the way she'd take the food back to the nest in. And there's a photograph at home of the four of us, myself and my older brother Connor and Tim, a name in the button there, and I was probably about 3 or 4 on that photograph.
That's right, that's right.
But he came out with you to film in harriers so that you could bring them to the wider public, I suppose, and their beauty and how important they are. So they've always, for me personally, they've always been part and parcel of what I am and what I'm involved in, and feel very deeply about them as a species, but also in terms of what they represent in terms of the wider ecosystem and environment. But just like you mentioned there, their sky dance is just one of the finest spectacles in all of nature, let alone Irish nature. It's absolutely something I hope everybody gets to see someday. So what it is the male in the month of March, April, will circle up in thermals, and he'll go so high up into the sky you wouldn't actually even be able to see him. It just becomes a speck of dust, and then just even with powerful binoculars, you'd hardly be able to see him. If you can imagine then this blue-grey rocket coming down out of the clouds, like thousands of meters up, and he's got these black tips to his wings, and he's hurtling towards the ground. But as he's doing that, he's not just dropping vertically, but he's actually corkscrewing and somersaulting as well. And he's coming down at breakneck speed, and you think, geez, he's going to hit off the ground. And just last minute, he pulls himself up, pulls on the air brakes, and comes back up again, straight up vertical again, like an invisible roller coaster across the sky. And he keeps doing that over and up and up and up. And when he reaches the top of the crescendo, he might do a somersault again, a flap down. And it's an incredible display where he is showing off to the ladies. He's saying, look what a great mover I am. I'm the guy for you. I've got the moves. And I suppose he's showing off his agility and his power and stamina and prowess. But he's also showing off to the other males that, look, this is my turf. This is my patch here. And the females will also partake in a bit of the sky dancing as well, which is only courteous, I suppose, really. But they're amazing. Like, and you know, with the changes in the landscape, and the hen harrier is reflective, and this is a male hen harrier. If the hen harrier really is reflective of the change in the landscape, like back in the 1970s, there was about 300 pairs in the country. Now there's less than 100. There's about 80 or 90 pairs confirmed in the last breeding survey. And for when I watch a hen harrier now, it's kind of mixed emotions, because there's driving so much joy and pleasure from watching them, but at the same time, there's this immense heartbreak, because you know how much trouble they're in, and it's almost like, you know, somebody who you love, you're watching them, and you might think, Jesus, they've only so long left. Like, you know, that's actually the stage that we've got with hen harriers. You know,
a few. I would say most people probably know a bit about them, but there's a few. They're not a typical bird insofar as where they nest, how they nest, what they eat. It might be interesting just to go into their
for sure,
how they live, and then why changes in the landscape have affected.
So they're typically an open landscape bird, traditionally in moorlands and in mixed farmland, this neck of the world around here, actually, we were out earlier on as well, up near Mount Callan as well. It's good hen harrier country, good mixture of habitats, nice big bushy hedgerows, wet grassland fields, bits of sally bushes, bits of ravines, long rivers and all of that, and connectivity down from the moorlands and the uplands. So they will hunt down into the high nature value farmland, and traditionally nest in scrub or nest in moorland. They nest on the ground. It was like, if you look at our endangered species in Ireland, red listed and amber listed birds, like predominantly they're, if you look at any of the ground nesting birds, they're in trouble, you know. So that's due to the changes in the landscape, and in the likes of the Sax Mountains, where you have a lot of forestry come in. You know, if you're a ground nesting bird, statistics are that if you're within 1 kilometre of a forest edge, you have a 10% chance of rearing your young, which is nuts. You have a 90% chance of not making it. So that's one of the big issues, and they're disappearing off the landscape, really. And like I say, they're kind of reflective of the overall ecosystem, because they're an umbrella species, an indicator species, but they're also an indicator of the way of managing the land, the way that has changed as well. So we've seen a lot of the small farmers lost off of this landscape. It's not economically viable. It doesn't make any money at all, really. So we've seen, you know, typically older generations passing away, the land being passed on to the son or daughter or the nephew or niece, and they might be working somewhere else. They might have no interest in farming. They might know how to farm. They certainly mightn't have any interest in it from a financial point of view, but then there might be big grants to get into forestry, you know. And
farming is actually important for the bird, is it? A certain type of gentle
It is,
farming?
yeah, a nice extensive type farming, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And the same with the curlew and snipe and red grouse and
Especially when asked about the curlew. Tim, was there a time in your career when the bird was doing well?
There was. Actually, it is a strange thing. It was being shot in my time when I came out of the start, because it was considered the mountain hawk, and it was supposed to be taking the grouse and all that of it. No, that was a time when we had grouse, and it has transformed now that we don't have grouse. I remember as a younger fella, we had Springer, Arrows, Setter and Pointer trials. The dogs, you would be, they'd be going for to be made champions and all that of it. And you'd walk behind them with this gun to only just a bang, like, it wouldn't do, so just pull a bang to tell the dog like that, you would have to fire a shot and all that of it. So, but it wound up anyway in the finish that the harrier was taking the grouse, they said, And one particular mountain now, which we don't have any grouse on today, we got 39 grouse in one day. And you know what, it's an awful loss. And that has come from not undergrazing. You know, that the heather, you know, you need 7 different growths of heather, heath or heather or whatever heather when I was growing up. And you need 7 different growths of heather to sustain a pack of grouse. Because if there's no point in having heather up here if the chick was down the bottom. I know that the parents should feed it for the start, but that was it. But then the people that were doing the shooting, I actually, you know, started to shoot the harriers because the grouse were disappearing. Of course, the grouse were disappearing because they were going managed. And at one stage, the harrier actually petered out for good. And with the first pair we got was in from Cork side. You know, we always, you wouldn't even like that. They're like, we'll be supported from Cork, you know. But it wound up anyway. They finished, they started to come back in, and then, God, they came from all over the place, and we had a great, you know, 3 and 4 and 5, and even we had one group of harriers, one pair of harriers that had six fledglings, and you know, and they were fantastic. And now it has gone down completely, back down again the other way, and because the forestry came all of a sudden. Forestry at an early stage is actually grand for harriers when the trees are small. But then when it gets grows up as a canopy, and there's no good in saying, you know, I'll give you dinner in 3 years' time. You know, so that's what actually happened. You know,
I suppose one thing that's really interesting as well from your perspective is that you were actually involved in the planting of those. So you mentioned earlier about the employment that there was, like, you know, so you were actually brought into that, and the Forest Service, I suppose, it started out, and then it became the Forest and Wildlife Service. But you have an interesting story about when you were actually planting and draining the peatlands.
Oh yeah,
for planting.
Yeah, at the time there, you know, like there was beautiful moorlands ploughed and planted, and actually the grouse, it was Forest and Wildlife Service at the time, but somebody often said, you know, you turn around and you look for a fiver to look after a grouse, or to look for 80,000 to buy a machine. You got 80,000, you wouldn't get the fiver. So what actually happened was, where the planting was, you know, it was planted during the breeding season as well. There was no interest in the world in wildlife. It was only just that to the name that was tagged on, you know, and that was it. And there was areas up round that was planted, that was ploughed out, you know, and there was birds that would rise in front of the machines, and the machine operators would just go around them, you know, and you know, then when that was all lost to see then, like, you know. And the curlew and the snipe and the, you know, there's an awful lot lost in the moorlands up there. But when you take, even if you go home tonight, and if you turn around and says, look, I'm going to cut my house by half, you know, you would have a fair height of stuff on the other side of it. If you said you can't go into half your house, 60% even of your house, you know, like, that's what has happened. The ground has been damaged, and it has been killed, has, you know, like, and it wasn't done for any bad reason. It was done unknown to everyone. There was peas planted here and a peas planted there, and this was a grew up like it overnight. No, nothing against trees, but they don't all have to be in one place, you know. Yeah. So, some of them will come off the mountain, or can't come off the mountain already, because to be in people's interest to come off the mountain, because they're not going to be viable. Even I was out one stage there with a forester one time. There was a fire, and he says, "Jeez, the only way this will pay if it was burned." You know, like, so. You know, at the end of the day, that's would be the case. Now, how much it could be restored to is another thing, because you would have a job to restore it now back to it will die off, and you will get some benefit out of it. But the biggest problem would be, the biggest thing would be not to have any more forestry. And especially they're gone down to the meadows now, to the improved grasslands, or the semi-improved grasslands, what we were looking at today. And, you know, like the species-rich grassland. And, it's all right, you'll sell a bit here and you'll sell a bit there. But if you have one good field there, it means an awful lot, to get rid of. But that have to be left. And it's quilt and all these places, we'd be glad to be rid of it because it's just not viable.
When I was growing up, Ray, you're nearly ashamed of if you were to say you were farming in Lyreacrompane.
That's right.
And I suppose we know now how important these areas are, and they're important from a water perspective. Like all the rivers that run off the Stacks Mountains and other mountains, and if there's rain now, it'd be down to the Stole Bridge, within a matter of hours, whereas before it would have been held in the bogs and the uplands.
That's right.
The headers and sphagnum mosses would have held it there and would have attenuated and slowly been released. Important from biodiversity nature perspective. We didn't have the monotone of green that some people would champion, but we had a rich tapestry in colour and a whole spectrum of colour, like in the species grasslands in the wet grasslands that we would have. We're now proud of that. We know that that's important from nature perspective. We know it's important from a climate perspective and water. We know that the bogs are really important and those grasslands are important for climate. And, places where forestry has been put in, I do feel that it would be actually easier to rehabilitate it than it was. I think there was more work in digging drains than there is in blocking drains and in taking out forestry. So I do think that there is scope for restoration. I do know, and I am proud now to say I'll be from the Stacks Mountains, knowing what we know now and knowing how important those mountains are, how precious they are. But they can be restored. But it's just it's going to take a big body of work, all right, But we're down to very low numbers. We're barely holding on by a thread in terms of hen harriers and curlew and even just our rivers as well, that run off there. They're in bad enough shape at the moment as well. It's
interesting what you were saying about the harrier being an indicator of an overall healthy ecosystem. I believe that peatlands are really important for, say, things like freshwater pearl mussel, because they keep a regular flow of water all through the summer, through the drier periods. And, so if the moorland is intact up there, it supports the harrier, but also downstream.
Yeah. And everybody's connected, even if you're not from a mountain area, you're connected with mountains. If you're living in a local town, the flow of river, the flow of water that comes down to your local town or village, the quality of water that comes, it all starts in the uplands, precious.
Just on what you were saying about, the perception of your farming area, there was a friend of mine, Vincent Downs from Milltown Malby, he owns a pub down there, and this might give you a bit of heart. He said one night there was a couple of lads, they were farmers, and one was showing another marsh fritillary butterfly. He said, now if you have one of them now, you could that could be good for the land. And he says, so the way it is now, the bad land's the good land now, lads. So, and that's interesting, there's a kind of cheesy business phrase like culture eats strategy for breakfast. Really, you want the local farming culture to say, this is the stuff really that we should be farming towards, rather than out and out production, which these landscapes aren't necessarily done.
No, and you do need the farmers in these areas as well, that particular type of farming for particular habitats and for particular species, because there's a lot of talk of rewilding now, and that means different things to different people. Some people it would mean closing the farm gate and even scrub up and even return to woodland, which could be the best thing in the world. It depends on what your target is. So it needs to be a very nuanced conversation around rewilding or nature restoration, as I'd prefer to call it, But I think, the ecosystem goods and services, you might call them, stemming from these landscapes and these habitats, are vital. And the farmers in those areas need to be rewarded for producing those and safeguarding those, because nobody else is going to do it, really,
It strikes me a lot of our most endangered species need that in between gentle management. They don't need abandonment and they don't need intensification. I'm thinking wildflower meadows or ground nesting birds. You were at a talk down near Kilrush a few years ago. You had a statistic about the curlew, and I think you used the 1990 World Cup. Do you remember that at all?
That's right, yeah. It's supposed to be well. Remember when Packy Bonner was making that save, and I think it was 24th of July, which is close enough now coming up. 1990, and we were out at my nan's place, my mum's mum. We were watching on television there, and that summer, there was the best part of 5,000 pairs of curlew breeding in Ireland that day, and today there's less than 100 pairs. So that's just absolutely shocking statistic. That's kind of putting it in cold terms, you know. So that's the degree to which we've lost things, you know, and we're like, in a way, like, again, mixed emotions, like, you know, well, maybe not so much mixed emotions, predominantly sad about the Stacks Mountains. Like, you know, we're so proud that the last pair of Curlew are in the Stacks Mountains, the last pair of Curlew in Kerry. There's none breeding in Cork, and there's none that are known of in Limerick, and we've got one pair left in Kerry. And but then, like, obviously straight away, it's like, how ashamed should we be? It's not, you know, you turn from pride that our locality has them, and then it's like, geez, how are we done with the place, you know? So so that really is another emblem of what we've lost and what we've done to the landscape, and yeah.
Well, the big thing now, and I think that people are bringing them to come together, and that start to collaborate with them, is that it was a case of them and us before, but now we're starting to talk to each other, you know, the landowners and all that. The landowners take exception to someone to come in with a nice clean suit and telling them what to do, you know, whereas, you know, I do know from Barry's talking to the local landowners and things like that, that if you work with them and, you know, like, and talk to them, and it will make sense, but, you know, like, at times, but it was interesting there about being proud from Lyreacrompane and all that, but we had every walk of life, you know, we worked so hard, and there was nothing there at the early stages, but every walk of life, somebody, whatever walk of life you talk about, nurses, doctors, priests, religious, whatever we want to talk about, even we had TDs there, you know, and but there was one famous one there, he was related to myself actually. He was DJ Maloney, but DJ Maloney was, and it's connected up through our marriage as well. DJ Maloney was, he wasn't very proud to be from Lyreacrompane. He was living in the middle of it. And everyone was saying to him, you know, like, you got married and saw in the papers that time, DJ Maloney, Listowel, DJ Maloney, Michael J. Maloney, Listowel, and all these photographs and all this people, what person was all over the papers. So he was living in the middle of Lyreacrompane. He was getting voted in from the middle of Lyreacrompane, but his head was too big to say he was from Lyreacrompane. But it wound up anyway to Martina's father or grandfather. You know, he was very witty, but they were all coming the following morning to mass, and they're shaking hands with him. Oh, congratulations, and rubbing him and tapping him. And Martina's grandfather walked over and he says to him, into the early out from Listowel. But, you know, there was that thing that was there, you know, but, you know, there was that thing there that was there by some people. But, you know, I can't understand why, because it was the most open place, it was the most beautiful place you could ever grow up, lovely place for children, you know, everything you ever wanted was there. And, you know, what actually happened was we got too big, Sherwood got too big for each other. Now, instead of the houses now we have and everything like that, you wouldn't get them inside the city. So we have every now, we have not.
I suppose it stemmed from a lack of awareness and understanding as to how important these areas are. And like even today, like, you know, people talk about the national parks and whatever, like, you know, but they don't talk about this middle ground, and this middle ground is so important that it's important for various wildlife and for nature, for water and carbon, like I say, like, you know, and it's not enough thought about it really. And just going back to for children actually as well, like when you think about it in real terms, like I have two girls now, they're 2 years old, two twins, and just think of the changes in generations, like, you know, from my grandmother's time to, you know, like imagine when she was growing up walking through the fields and bogs, like she couldn't but come across curlew and snipe and red grouse and harriers and kicking them out of the way, basically, I'd say. And my two girls now, like, I don't know, will they ever grow up to see hen harrier or a curlew? Even just a quick anecdote, if I could, like, you know, even I'm living in Bale now at the Moutage Channel, and the two girls were born in 2021, and one of the girls in Shoon, she was at home first. Fionn was kept back in hospital about a month, and during that time, the cuckoo was calling. It was during the summertime, and I was thinking in real time, like, this is how fast, or this is how real extinction is actually happening. I was thinking in real time that if Fionn doesn't come back soon, the cuckoo will have stopped calling, and she might never hear the cuckoo again because in her own locality, because I had seen the extent to which changes had happened in the landscape, the habitats that had been taken out, the wetlands that had been drained. And I felt like a race against time, and time actually won out. And she didn't get to hear the cuckoo calling, and Siún did, but Fiann didn't. And so cuckoo hasn't come back since. He wasn't there in 22 and wasn't there this year either. And so that's it in her lifetime. Like, she might never be able to say that she heard a cuckoo in her own locality, So that's how fast all of this is happening. And it just, I suppose, drives us more to try to protect what we have and try to secure some future there, and realise how important these areas are.
I promised I'd end on hope. Tim, you said you retired about 10 years ago. I feel bad. I meant to dig into your tales of being a wildlife ranger in West Kerry, there in South Kerry, but anyway.
No, it's so good people in wildlife service now. Anyway, I didn't realise that down there.
One of the things you said to me is that at your retirement party, everybody came out, people from all walks of life, people that you'd worked with, firemen, like everyone, that you rarely fell out with people. And I think, Barry, I know you've really good relationships with the farmers that you work with, and Malcolm mentioned it last night, the Minister mentioned it last night, that really so much of it is about relationships and building trust, and that's certainly one element of hope. But where else do you see, what makes you excited, or where do you see potential?
Well, looking at this room would make you excited, and listening to the people today. I wouldn't even have seen this. I never saw this in my lifetime. You'd have one fella there, Jesus, we were shut up. So when I see the enthusiasm that's here today and things like that, it actually rises my heart up. I see Barry, sometimes I do try and pull him back, calm down, you see. And then when I see Siún out there and she watching, so maybe they might take the third generation to get it somewhere right. But look, this is hope, and the people that are here are so educated, so with it now, and the only thing they can live it the way I lived it. Although unfortunately that I didn't have the support at the time. There was no support at the time and you treated very, very gentle at the time because you'd be told where to go. I remember going when I went in giving talks to Tagasons and things like that. If you smoke the environment, they'd be looking at you and you just looked with any lip service at the time. And like I say, when we were brought on, we came on as that time, but we developed, actually, that group of rangers developed the wildlife service, believe it or believe it not, because there was enough of us there interested. We went out, we done the footwork, we had to take it easy, we had to identify the bird life, we had to do everything on our own. I remember one DCO one time, District Conservation Officer one time, a ranger came into him and he was inside one man at his office and he was sitting back. I don't know what way he felt from Monday morning, but anyway, the young man says, I'm the new ranger. He said, well, if what? He said, go on range. So that was the way it is now. They'll go on range. So that was where, that's where we came from. But we had some great people in it. We had some fantastic people in it. We had more people in, and they wouldn't scratch themselves. But I read the last line of whatever circular came out, and they shoved that down our throat, how wrong or right it was. But listening to the topics today, my God, something, my head is buzzing for it, So that's the hope. That's the hope. The hope.
Barry?
Yeah. Jay, one bit.
I do really, Barry. Sorry not to have to follow that up, but
okay, guys.
You could look at a more technical thing.
It's interesting when you take the longer term perspective, because you're talking about, I suppose, the best part of 80 years of experience there, and you're seeing it long run through, and maybe you would hope that if you graphed it, in terms of where we are at, we've lost a lot, but maybe we're bottoming out in certain extent, and maybe things will start to improve again, particularly with good people like yourselves coming on board with the nature conservation drive. If you ask me honestly and openly, it depends on the day. You would get me predominantly more and more these days. You would find me giving a negative answer, and not with much hope. And I think that's something that we need to be open and honest on as well at times. And I think those of us who work in nature conservation and really care and really understand it, it's highly attritional. It's depressing. You do find yourself in a really dark place, particularly when you care so much and you keep banging your head against the wall and keep trying. I know myself and Hannah, we had dinner there in Dublin during the week, and I'd say it was more like a counselling session than anything else. We're kind of opening up to each other. I think if you have any children, talking about the third generation, I would definitely give my girls a sense of love for nature and the environment. But if they were to go into nature conservation, I would nearly talk them out of it because it's really hard. I would talk them into going into psychiatry or something like that. But there's definitely going to be work in that for people who are heavily involved in conservation. We all know it, and we all need to be conscious of that and help each other out. But one thing that does give me hope is when I see great people working hard, and it's like being on a football team and you see the lad next to you and he's trying just as hard as you are, like, and you kind of say, come on, let's do this, so we'll drive on, like, you know. Just to answer the question, I suppose finally, like Kerry will finally get around to answering the question. The one thing, the greatest hope that I have is that more and more conservation is coming from within and from the locality and from the community, and that's the way we're operating more and more conservation programs now, that there's local people involved in it. There's local people taking the charge, local people being proud of their mountains, being proud of their locality. Like the Burn is a classic example. Like, you know, it's a sense of place and sense of pride, and they're not doing it because Dublin wants this protected or because Brussels wants to protect it, because they want to protect it, you know. So that's the biggest source of hope that I would have, you know. And the more of that and the more local people and the more local accents and the more people are on the ground talking with the landowners, who are the most important people of all if we're going to save nature and save the environment, the better, like, you know. Yeah.
Thanks so much, lads. Give him a full of us. Really appreciate it, Barry. Thanks,